Into a sleepy town in the high desert of New Mexico, an unseen but powerful force arrives to wreak havoc. But what is the force? Is it COVID? Is it the woke mind virus? Is it something else entirely? Is it perhaps the solid gold magikarp?
The movie is called Eddington. This podcast is called All Those Moments. I'm Benji Wade.
And I'm Luke Baumgarten.
All those moments will be lost in time, like tears in rain.
All Those Moments is a podcast that connects social, political, and cultural moments with moments from our favorite movies and television shows. Luke, I have a confession to make. I think, deep admiration and affection for Ari Aster after watching this movie.
I think I do too.
All right, now I'm going to ask you a follow-up question.
Sure.
Is Eddington one of your favorite movies?
I don't know if it's one of my favorite movies of all time or anything.
Which, by the way, we've only seen it one time, which is kind of hard when you're doing a podcast.
Yeah, for sure. I think a little bit later on, there's a moment where you sort of have a critique of the film, and I think that I don't disagree with it, but I'm also like, I kind of want to rewatch it again because stuff that happens early in the movie kind of depends on the payoff to not be schlocky to me. It's like once I understood the totality of the vision, I kind of want to go rewatch it.
It'd be great for us to be able to get screener copies of movies so that we can watch them more than one time, because I was definitely using the internet to like give me the plot summaries to remember exactly what I saw because I only got to see it one time. But I think the note that I had in my mind that was repeating was I liked it. I thought it was super enjoyable. It was very entertaining. At one point, I think it had probably the funniest moment of a movie in 2025. We'll see how it holds up.
Okay, I'm curious to see which one moment that is for you, but yeah.
For sure. But I had this thing going through my head and we both kind of looked over at each other and we said, that data center.
Yeah.
It reminded me of the beginning of Back to the Future when, what is it called? The Twin Pines Mall is being,
right.
It's being built and constructed. And like, it was like this signal of development that was happening in the 1950s. And so.
Well, it goes back to what we talked about with Eephus last week. What they're going to build on that ball field isn't the mall. It's not the new development that's going to kick the Goonies out of their neighborhood. The thing that I found fascinating about this is I hadn't watched the movie yet, but I'd listened to a couple of these interviews with Ari Aster, and he keeps saying this is a movie about a data center. It's a movie about a data center. He's very like he's trying to get people to look at the data center, and I don't actually think most people who review this film pay attention to the data center at all.
Has he been saying that in interviews?
Every interview I've listened to.
Okay.
It took me a while. And I don't even think I did it in that conversation we had to understand or even to figure out what my interpretation of the data center was. It took me like a week. So yeah, was it the same for you?
It was. And I unlocked, I think, some of the keys to interpreting the data center and some of the things that I've read in the last few days, which we'll get into. I'm definitely not like an Ari Aster a historian by any means. And I think both of us he's fairly new to us. I mean, he's so new to me that I hadn't seen one of his movies. My 14-year-old daughter had seen both Hereditary and Midsommar. I hadn't seen either one of them until like 3 months ago.
Yeah.
And we're going to talk about this kind of personal connection I have to the story of Ari Aster because he went to the American Film Institute at a time period where I narrowly didn't go to the American Film Institute when he was.
You could have been his classmate.
I could have been his classmate. He would have been a year ahead of me, and I'll tell that story in this podcast. But even Ray, my wife, was saying, I really want to meet Ari Aster. She thinks that there's a possibility that this small podcast is going to have the type of reach where he'll come and chat with us. And she's like, if you do, could I talk to him? And she's asking me this earnestly. And I'm like, he's not going to want to talk to me, let alone like, by proxy, my wife, who's a therapist, has some great questions for you because she really holds you in affection as well, even though she's never seen one of your movies.
Well, and on the topic of people who need therapy, I kind of assumed because
it's a great segue. It's okay to talk about me, Luke. It's not too early.
So I had seen Hereditary. I hadn't yet seen Midsommar. I'm listening to these podcasts. And just based on having seen Hereditary, what I knew about Aster, what I knew about Midsommar, and specifically what I knew about Beau is Afraid, which is a movie I tried to watch and couldn't quite get through. I still actually want to watch it now because I like his other movies enough that I want to fight through it. I was expecting him to come on the mic and sound like central casting Woody Allen, like this, neurotic, nebbish, whatever. And he's what I thought of. I knew or what I assumed about him from watching his movies and knowing about his movies was like, oh, this is a totally different dude.
Yeah, he comes across as both thoughtful and like somebody who really, really cares about what's happening in the world, especially when he's talking about Eddington, which definitely caught me by surprise. I had the same expectation. I went back and listened to conversations he had, in particular on The Big Picture with Sean Fennessy, when he was talking about first Hereditary, then Midsommar. I have not seen Beau is Afraid. I didn't get to that one. But yeah, he does come across as somebody who deeply cares.
Can I give you a viewing tip for Beau is Afraid?
Yeah. Don't take an edible.
Don't take 2 edibles and be laying in a pitch black room when the opening scene of Beau is Afraid happens, because let's just say I almost had a psychotic break myself.
I'm not surprised. And it's great advice for a lot of people who probably made that mistake thinking, I've heard this movie's kind of trippy, so I'm going to trip balls and watch Beau is Afraid. Bad idea. Speaking of recent podcasts, he was also on one of my favorite podcasts, Blank Check, talking about the movie Miller's Crossing, which happens to be, can check the receipts, it's my favorite movie of all time. So listening to Ari Aster go on Blank Check, one of my favorite podcasts to talk about Miller's Crossing, was a total treat. I really enjoyed that episode. Did you like listening to him talk about that?
I loved it. It actually I've only seen Miller's Crossing maybe once or twice, like with most Coen Brothers movies, except for, there are a few that I've seen several times. I was remembering like the Gabriel Byrne character from that movie, and my memory was different than the way they were talking about it. So yeah,
I've probably seen it 400 times, and that might be accurate.
That's me with Tombstone. You want to do a Miller's Crossing Tombstone double feature one time?
Let's do it. I was working at a grocery store when I rented as a dude bagging groceries. I kept seeing the VHS of it. And that long lens from Barry Sonnenfeld, the director of photography for that movie, who went on to become, of course, a famous director as well. But that shot, just something about it really intrigued me. The Gabriel Byrne character hovering over John Turturro with a gun. And I was just like, I've got to see this movie.
Totally.
I stole the VHS from... I was working at a grocery store that also rented VHS tapes. I just kept it and I paid them. And it was a time period where you had to pay like $80 or $90 for a VHS tape.
Oh, I remember late VHSs and early DVDs, sometimes it'd be like $150, $160 back when when rentals were really taking off, because those film companies really wanted to get as much money
rental revenue. That's right.
Yeah.
So another kind of quick piece of synchronicity related to the Miller's Crossing podcast. I was reading an article in a magazine called The Gate, and this came out like years and years ago, but Ari Aster name checks a director named Andrew Haig and his movie 45 Years, which I just watched on Wednesday night with Ray.
Really?
Oh man, it hit like a brick. I can't more strongly recommend.
Well, what's it about?
Oh geez. A couple in their 70s celebrating their 45th wedding anniversary. Okay. And the man receives a letter from some authorities in Switzerland letting him know that his girlfriend, when he was in his 20s, who died during a tragic alpine climbing accident, her body had been found. And it's the impact that discovery has on this couple as they're getting ready to celebrate their 45th anniversary.
So it's like deep history
stuff, and very Ari Aster, because the turn in the movie is something so utterly horrifying, not like a horror movie horrifying, but just kind of horror. Like a personal, like a tragedy in a family sort of horrifying. And I won't reveal the secret.
Well, also that deep history stuff kind of ties into Hereditary. It clearly ties into, I think it has aspects tied into like deep family stuff, and connection ties into Midsommar as well.
All right, Luke, let's do some housekeeping real quickly. We're building this car as we drive it. Our next episode is going to be about Jeff Buckley. I'm not going to go into it now, so I don't even want to say anything more, because otherwise we'll go into that too much. But the documentary is called It's Never Over, Jeff Buckley. It's the latest film from the incredible Academy Award nominated filmmaker Amy Berg. She made the movies. If anybody goes and looks at her filmography, you've probably seen at least one or two of her documentaries. Deliver Us from Evil, Phoenix Rising. There's also going to be a 20-minute video of a Jeff Buckley live concert.
Oh, interesting. And that's part of the theatrical release.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Magnolia Pictures is including that with it.
Oh, wow.
So it's going to be a magical evening. I'm not going to even get into Jeff Buckley and how much he means to me, but I think we're also going to record an interview with Amy Berg, the filmmaker. So that episode should be coming out sometime in mid-August. It'll be our next episode.
And we're going to try to record the audience like we did for Eephus.
Totally. Yeah. So far, we're 2 for 2. The Eephus screening, when we got some responses from people, obviously some really beautiful things were said. We're going to get to the responses we got from the 2 people that we watched Eddington with. And I just want to add one more thing before we get into this podcast, and that'll lead into a quote from Ari Aster. I love Ari Aster. if for no other reason than why he said he wanted to make Eddington, rather than like ignore what's happening in the world right now, which a lot of like popular magazines and movie culture, whether it's Letterboxd or I just named names. I won't name any more names, but these interviews, they still take on all the same sort of dynamic as if like the world is kind of not crumbling. And Ari Aster's like, no. This is a quote from him. I was trying to make a film that feels like that time to me. And he's talking about COVID and feels like this country. When I see something reflected back to me that in any way confirms what I'm feeling, it just makes me feel less alone. I feel like there's this big retreat happening, retreating into the past, retreating into nostalgia, or even into our trauma. Here we are. We're at this unprecedented moment. We're in the collapse of something, but we're also on the cusp of something. Something new is coming, and I'm afraid, and I don't know where we're going, and I want to see work that is reflecting that. I'm just like, how do you not have affection for a filmmaker that has...
Yeah, for sure.
He's been given, to use the expression from the podcast, he's been given a kind of a blank check by A24 to go make things. Let's hope that A24 don't lose
his first
faith.
two really succeeded, right? Because Midsommar a hit? Because Hereditary,
I think it was.
To budget, was a smash, right?
Yeah, I think you're right.
And I think Midsommar did really well too.
That's a good point. That's a good point.
So Benji, how did we get from Eephus to Eddington? Not that these things have to have through lines, but right now this was an unintentional through line, at least for me.
Totally serendipitous.
Yeah.
In fact, if you had asked me when I saw the original poster teasing Eddington, I would have just said, well, what they have in common is that they both begin with the letter E. And then upon further investigation, and especially after watching it, it's like Eddington deals with the same themes of Eephus, the same things that we want to explore. Yeah. The name of this podcast, the death soliloquy from Blade Runner, loss of shared experiences, loss of unifying civic activities. And because Eddington is set in modern day, it's the loss of agreed upon basic facts by society is what we're also losing.
But if the film depicts the factionalization of a small town in a way that Eephus just doesn't, because it wasn't the right point in history, not just into left and right, but into a series of subgroups that we all probably recognize. And this is why I think the older I get, I think, and the more that I sort of see things, the more clear it becomes that like the left-right dichotomy is just complete BS, and to the extent to which it is still the governing aspect of how electoral politics happens in America. It's really, really toxic, because the factionalization isn't just left versus right. It's like believers, electoralists, protesters, skeptics, conspiracists.
Well, and why I love both Eephus and Eddington, there was a quote from a podcast where Adam Naiman, who's a critic that works for The Ringer and does a bunch of other stuff, he was talking about how this is obviously a popular topic, but the way that it's gone about with Carson Lund and Eephus is this kind of retrospective. It's a look back. It's got this kind of reverie for the past, the way that Wonder Years did when we were kids, right?
For sure.
And there's a place for that. And that's great. It is great to see a kind of wholesome and feel-good depiction of the things that we've lost. But there's also a great place for oppositional art like Eddington, which is darkly satirical. It's not just looking back at what we've lost. It's looking at what replaced what we've lost. And what has replaced what we've lost is fucking terrible.
Yeah.
Anyway, in this podcast, we're going to talk about the movie from the filmmaking to its cultural significance, its relationship to other movies, and finally, of course, how it's working or not working with audiences. So I think we're going to get all of our Ari Aster takes out in this episode, because I had not even seen any of Ari Aster's movies, as I mentioned, 3 months ago.
Yeah.
But I kept seeing reference to the fact that he went to the American Film Institute. I was like, oh, wait a minute. That's way too interesting to me. I need to probably watch his movies and think a little bit about this. So when I was a kid, Luke, I think going to the American Film Institute was my number one dream. I was very familiar with all the filmmakers that went there, like David Lynch, Terrence Malick, Aronofsky, John Dahl, and Scott Chestnut, who both went to my undergrad school, Montana State.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And so this wasn't just because you'd seen the AFI's 100 greatest XYZ stuff?
No.
Which is like the only reason I know about AFI is from those lists when I was a teenager.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. I think I know the conservatory, which used to be called like the Center for Advanced Film Studies or something like that when it first started in 1969. But when I was going to Montana State, I knew that a couple filmmakers that went to Montana State also attended AFI, including John Dahl and Scott Chestnut, who worked together on a lot of movies, including Rounders. I'm sure you know that movie quite well.
Great movie. Love that.
So I applied to the program in the end of 2009, and they invited me to be interviewed. Dudes that interviewed me were named Robert Mandel, who was the dean at the time, and a guy named Gil Dennis. So Robert Mandel was the dean. He made a movie called School Ties with Brendan Fraser. And Gil Dennis was the other person who interviewed me. He had co-wrote Walk the Line, which had Joaquin Phoenix. This podcast is going to be 6 degrees of Joaquin Phoenix, I swear to God. And I've read in interviews with Ari Aster that the people at AFI not just expected, but wanted him to make Oscar movies. And he was like, I'm not interested in that whatsoever. But I talked to him about some of my influences. I remember shouting out James Gray, who was at the time a lecturer, I think, at AFI. And I had seen his most recent movies, We Own the Night and Two Lovers, 2 movies that had Joaquin Phoenix, by the way.
Wow.
And then Ari Aster, of course, goes on to make 2 movies now that have Joaquin Phoenix. And I brought up Todd Haynes, Todd Solondz, Todd Field, and some of these filmmakers I know influenced Ari Aster, which is kind of interesting. What I didn't know was, and only learned recently, is that Ari Aster, while I'm interviewing with Gil Dennis and Robert Mandel, Gil Dennis was in charge of creative oversight for thesis projects. Yeah. And I saw this interview in June of 2020 when Ari Aster was writing the first draft of Eddington. He said, at AFI, you get to make all the mistakes you were eventually going to make anyway. And he admitted that he, quote unquote, ripped off everybody. And he said, I mean, I'm still ripping off everybody. And I thought that level of candor was just awesome. So I want to talk about his thesis film that he made while he was at AFI. And so when I'm sitting there talking to Gil Dennis, and he's working with Ari Aster at the time, ostensibly on making this movie called The Strange Thing About the Johnsons. Do you know anything about this?
No.
Okay. The story is, it's a 30-minute film. You can watch it on YouTube. I don't know that I could recommend it because here's the story. It's about a son who rapes his father for several years. The father writes a manuscript about it, then gets run over by a van trying to run away from his son. The movie ends when the son tries to shove his mom into a burning fireplace, and the mother then stabs the son to death with a fire iron and burns the manuscript. And did I mention, Luke, that the family's black?
It also sounds like a student film.
I'm not going to include this part, but his dad interrupts him jerking off in the beginning of the movie. And then it's like, son, it's okay. That's totally normal. And then the camera reveals that the son has a curled up photograph of his dad in his hand. That is the opening of it. It is very clearly influenced by Todd Solondz. Ari Aster has mentioned the movie Happiness. I loved that movie in my mid-20s.
This really means something to me. I'll always treasure it as a token.
No, you won't. Because this is for the girl who loves me. The girl who cares about me for who I am. Not what I look like.
I think he was also influenced by filmmakers like Douglas Sirk. There's like this very sentimental quality to some of the stuff that he does that I think is underappreciated. One of the short films I made in film school that I used to apply to get into the American Film Institute was based on a true story. It was about a dude who thought he heard a woman in his apartment building being sexually assaulted. And it turns out that the guy was actually just watching a loud porno.
Oh yeah.
And this guy grabs
such cases.
Yeah, this guy grabs an old like heirloom Civil War era cavalry sword and like attacks his neighbor thinking that he's raping a woman.
Jeez.
Yeah. So I made that. That was my movie. And I was thinking to myself, if you're Gil Dennis and you're working with Ari Aster on Strange Thing About the Johnsons.
Ari Aster's fault you got waitlisted is what you're saying? Is this entire story just a...
100%. Gil Dennis was like, I'm not so sure about this guy. Gil Dennis died in 2015. He was one of the original 18 filmmakers who attended AFI when the conservatory was opened in 1969. I can't say for sure that working with Ari Aster on The Strange Thing About the Johnsons killed Gil Dennis prematurely because he died of a heart attack 4 years after that movie was released. But that's my story about how I have a cosmic connection to Ari Aster. Ari Aster, you're welcome to come on this podcast anytime so we can talk about that and you can push back against any dumb things I said.
Hey everyone, it's Benji. Before we get to the main course, aka the films of Ari Aster, I want to warn you that the rest of this episode is chock full of spoilers, and I think it's my hope that you've seen all his movies, in particular Hereditary, Midsommar, and of course Eddington. Neither of us have seen Beau is Afraid, so you're safe there. And I also wanted to quickly wrap a bow on the story that I was telling about the American Film Institute. It's not something I've talked about a lot publicly, but I did get accepted once upon a time, a few months after being waitlisted. I decided not to go for lots of reasons. Maybe one day I'll talk about those reasons, but enough about me. Enjoy the rest of the show and beware of spoilers.
Let's work our way quickly from Hereditary to Eddington with quick summaries. Every time I listen to people or I ask people what their experience is of Ari Aster movies, it's typically like a gasp. There's like a ooh, or a well, like there's like this hesitation to everybody. So Luke, tell me about your first experience watching an Ari Aster movie, because you've watched Hereditary a long time ago, right?
I mean, Hereditary just struck me as like an offbeat horror movie. It felt, honestly, and again, because Ari Aster was kind of a non-entity to me at the time, it felt like, oh, A24 is making a Blumhouse picture. That makes sense, right? It's clearly thinking about things in terms of like there's metaphor in a way that like most Blumhouse films don't really, I don't think. And because it's like demons and stuff, it kind of, I think it touched somewhere in my my religious trauma.
Well, when he talked about ripping off filmmakers, and he was really open about that, I think this has examples of how he goes from one piece of and style and technique of storytelling that's inspired by something to something else entirely. I think it starts off like Ordinary People, and by the ending, it's got elements of The Shining, but also elements of like, it's a portrait of like a demonic cult that's doing horrible things to these people. Right. You think it starts off, you think it's going to be about the genetics of this family that has the character played by Toni Collette has a history in her family of schizophrenia and other mental illness. And you're like, oh, it's going to be about that. And it's like, oh no, it turns into something else entirely around the midway point. It clearly also showed that he's got a lot of skills as a filmmaker, and he was going to get an opportunity to do something else because it was a huge success, as you were describing earlier.
Yeah.
Tell me about your experience with Midsommar.
I watched it with my wife. I think she really disliked it insofar as it felt to her like it's gorgeously shot. It's beautifully acted. Some of the I mean, Florence Pugh, like you can understand why everybody thinks she's like one of the great actors of her generation.
This is feeling definitely cringe horror.
It's like, it's hard for me to watch, but the performances are so good. I was like glued to it. What it felt like to me was like a meditation and a metaphor on like a breakup. My first thing was like, oh, this is this bad relationship she's in with her boyfriend. Horrible things happen to her family. And this is the sort of outward manifestation of her breaking up with her boyfriend, basically.
I came to the breakup reading late because admittedly, I focused directly in on this. It's got this sort of revisionist Wizard of Oz thing to it, where she's like Dorothy and these characters, these bozo American liberal arts college kids that she's with that are terrible, by the way.
Bad people.
Deeply misogynistic.
These are all like sociology students who are just like fetishizing other cultures.
Totally.
And treating like the fetish itself as the important thing, not any deeper understanding of human culture.
Oh my God, the women here. What is it that makes them hotter?
The Vikings grabbed all the best babes from other countries and dragged them over.
How long is the drive?
And that's what I focused in on, was the way that these kids were interpreting what are they called? The Harga, these sicko pagans, and also the Will Poulter character, who's truly evil. First, he's trying to encourage his buddy to be really like inhumane and cruel to the Florence Pugh character. Yeah. And then he goes to this culture doing the full-on fetishization thing that these people are so quaint and wonderful. Let's just go get really high.
Well, to me, he's just like the prototypical ugly American, like using people's culture as like an excuse to get drunk. It's like a sandbox for horny people,
as a backdrop for selfies.
Yeah. And so like he just struck me as like the prototypical, like I'm using this experience for my own edification in one way, but then, you know, the students who are all looking to find their thesis topics are kind of doing the same thing, but from more of an academic lens. And it's actually not any better.
All these terrible misogynistic dudes that treated Danny terribly are dispensed with by this pagan cult, and she is accepted, not just accepted, but celebrated. So at the end of the movie, she finds her family that love her. I couldn't help but have this interpretation of Louis Buñuel and his documentary, I guess you could call it a documentary, called Land Without Bread. It came out, since the 1930s. It's a critique of like travelogues that were really popular at the time.
So this is like a mockumentary, basically, like a proto-mockumentary.
Dude, it is Christopher Guest in the 1930s, but it's Louis Buñuel. The only other time I've been entirely disgusted the way that I was by Midsommar. There's two movies that I watched as a kid that I absolutely had no business watching. One was The Shining, which influenced me for the rest of my life. It's 1 or 1A is one of my favorite movies of all time. The other was The Cook, the Thief, his wife, and her lover. There's a character in that movie. It's a Peter Greenaway movie. It's very like controversial, where Helen Mirren, who plays the wife, has forced the thief to eat the genitals of the lover.
Try the cock, Albert. It's a delicacy.
I then listened to an interview with Ari Aster where he said that that was a movie that felt quote unquote evil to him. And those images are just seared into my brain. And I was thinking, I don't know, my man, watching Midsommar, there are some scenes in that where I'm like,
think he was trying to do the same thing to us that got done to him with that movie?
Dude, I really wished at some points watching Midsommar, I felt like early internet, like rotten.com or something. I should not be watching this. I think Aster's asking questions about the rituals that we have and take for granted.
And that we don't think about.
We don't think about it. So I had a kind of a disagreement with Ray talking about this of like, is the act of using cell phones to look at images coming out of Gaza that are totally horrifying and just kind of swiping really quickly, is that not a ritualized experience for us these days? Yeah. And here we are. He's like, okay, we think these pagans are disgusting. Well, there's actually a bit, you might not like it, but there's an ethos to santicide that's depicted in this pagan culture.
Is it more or less disgusting that like these people sort of have built a culture where, you know, people sort of, you know, voluntarily remove themselves from the resource pool when they reach a certain age because they're no longer productive or whatever?
Yeah.
Or is it worse that like plenty of old people in America die because they don't have adequate health insurance or, you know, things like that? Like,
but we don't think twice about the rituals that we all have that lead to people like the Will Poulter character, who's just obviously awful. You know, it's like, we don't even think about that. Aster said, I think a really important thing about Midsommar after it came out, he said, it wants to be upsetting. It wants to be kind of alienating. If it's working, it should be a pummeling experience. And I would say that by degrees, until Eddington, his movies had become increasingly difficult and more pummeling for audiences.
All right, so let's just get to Eddington. Set in May 2020, in the fictional town of Eddington, New Mexico, the story follows Sheriff Joe Cross, played by Joaquin Phoenix, who's an asthmatic COVID skeptic who defies mask mandates and subsequently challenges the town's progressive-ish mayor, Ted Garcia. It kind of seems like a normal Democrat, but kind of has hair like Gavin Newsom, and that becomes germane later on. Like, Sheriff Joe has trouble at home in his relationship with his wife, Louise, who we mentioned was played by Emma Stone. It's a small part for Emma, but she's like really good in it. Like, the things that we think are going to be important in this movie end up being less important than they think they are. So
yeah, like similar to Hereditary, you think it's going to be a bedroom drama.
Right. It actually ends up being more about Joe and his relationship with Emma Stone's Louise's mom, which is weird. But all of this is happening in the backdrop of first the pandemic and then the murder of George Floyd. We're in the lockdown. People are arguing over whether they should be masking or not, indoors, outdoors, whatever. There are BLM protests in this tiny little town, which feels a little bit like, I don't know how many BLM protests were happening in towns that size.
No, I've thought about that.
Even in kind of like rural but blue purple New Mexico, it's a little bit like a microcosm of the whole country, right? Like, and that's one of the things, like, this isn't a literal story about a specific town. It's more of like a microcosm. It's like the world in miniature is like been shrunken down and put into this town. And all of these different people are sort of having reactions we recognize as the reactions we were seeing mostly through our screens on our phones at that time.
I'm glad you mentioned that because it'd be easy to nitpick this movie. I had the nitpick. I think it's been discussed a lot. People are like, oh, this doesn't seem like very clearly Ari Aster is not saying this was happening in every town the size of, it feels like it's supposed to be like a 5,000 or 6,000 person town.
Yeah, maybe.
So, but that's completely missing the point.
So it's happening during the backdrop of the beginning of the pandemic and then the murder of George Floyd. Throughout, tensions within the community are heightened by misinformation, pandemic paranoia, performative activism, all of which are heightened by the phones everyone carries around with them and the social media apps on those phones. There's a lot of violence in this film, but it doesn't happen right away. Again, there's like, as with all other Aster movies that we've seen, there's a turn where you think you're watching one film and it becomes a different film. Mm-hmm. Once it gets going, though, everything about Eddington has changed. Well, almost everything. One thing about Eddington remains exactly the same, beginning to end. It's the thing Aster has been saying this movie is really about in his interviews, maybe Eddington was doomed well before COVID, well before George Floyd, and maybe everything we're seeing is actually an image projected on a screen in front of the actual antagonist, the massive data center.
Luke, that's a great A-plot summary. Let's talk about the moments. That's how we're building this podcast. We do have a couple of quotes that we got from the people that watched this movie with us. Yeah. Shout out Tracy and Lenore. Starting with a stranger rides into town. Do you want to set this one up for us?
A raving man shambles down a dusty road toward the town of Eddington. He's speaking the whole time, but none of his words are actually coherent. He's speaking
gibberish.
It's gibberish.
To me, that character is a red herring, and I'm going to wait to tell you what I think his significance is until we talk about another moment from the movie.
Absolutely a red herring. It's not even I think, and this is where I was actually a little bit skeptical. I'm worried going in, is Aster going to really...
Same.
Am I going to feel like Aster's takeaway from that period in time is within a country mile of my takeaway from that time and my cultural read on it?
Is he punching down?
This character walks on the screen. I'm like, this is not a great start for me. Once the data center comes in the background, so as the tracking shot's walking, we see the data center enters frame. He leaves frame, and all we see is this glittering, shiny, new, massive data center that nobody really knows what it does. There's a moment where somebody's like, I think it's about AI or it's a language model or something, but nobody thinks it's anything other than going to bring jobs to the town.
The next moment we want to talk about is the grocery store incident. Early in the film, Sheriff Joe Cross, played by Joaquin Phoenix, is refusing to wear a mask. He's in the supermarket. The crowd that's in the grocery store turns against him, especially the mayor, Ted Garcia, played by Pedro Pascal. And I want to use, like we did in our Eephus episode, I want to use one of the quotes we had from the people that watched the movie with us.
And it does bring you back to the times and just seeing the funny little things like toilet paper stacked up by their doors and then people wearing their masks under their nose. And
it was all false. Even Fauci said that the masks were unnecessary and caused so much division. You'd go to the store and people would be, bickering, and it was just so divisive and unnecessary.
We kind of differ on our opinions of masks and stuff. So
the thing I found really funny about this is at one point, Mayor Ted says, COVID stays alive on paper for 5 weeks, when he's berating his son who was running around without a mask and he's really worried about him. Yeah. And it's true that nobody knew, there was no agreed upon basis of kind of any sort of factual interpretations of what was happening. Yeah. This is sort of what this movie ends up being about. And I couldn't help but think about that in the first month or so of the pandemic, I learned a lot about what was happening from a world-renowned epidemiologist named Michael Osterholm, who came on the Joe Rogan podcast.
Yeah.
And it was a year later or maybe a year and a half later, that Joe Rogan is taking ivermectin when he gets COVID. Right. And then 4 years later, of course, he's trying to get Trump reelected. So it's just funny where we've gone. Everybody's got their read of Joe Rogan and his place in pop culture right now. But at the time, I learned a lot listening to his podcast because it was a 2-hour interview with this guy who was kind of warning about things that ended up happening.
Well, and one of the criticisms of people like Rogan and Theo Von and stuff is that they're the dumb guy interviewers, where they just are like, oh yeah, okay, keep talking, whatever. Yeah. I'm curious. There's less critical valence in the interview. So when you're talking to a world-renowned epidemiologist for 3 years, you feel like 3 hours, you feel like you're getting a masterclass in epidemiology. But when that same thing is happening with RFK Jr., you're getting the seeds of the Maha movement, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I think one of the things that was really jarring, you got a note here about cell phones, Benji. I want to hear yours. I was just really jarred by the cell phones. I get why people want to make nostalgic movies that don't include cell phones, and not just for plot reasons. I'm sick to death
because they suck
of how much I stare at my phone. I don't love. And it's so much a part of culture. There's a million TV shows that are contemporary where they've got do we put the bubble on screen when a text pops up? Do we show the screen? And then I have to if I'm watching at home, I have to pause and stand up and so I can read what's actually on.
Any attempt to make movies that show people using cell phones, it kind of inherently sucks.
It sucks.
I remember adding to the edit of a short film I made in film school in 2000. I was finishing the final edit in 2009.
Yeah.
I added a title to the beginning saying October 1994, because there was no way you could believe the events that happened in my film. By the time I was finishing editing it, we were on our way to
Well, 09 is like,
smartphones.
that's maybe second year of iPhones. You're still, a lot of people are still using flip phones or Blackberries, but they're still like, they're on their phones all the time.
It was happening enough that when I was applying to go to film schools like the American Film Institute, I was like, I have to change this. If anybody's going to watch it, it's going to be like, that dude just would have called somebody. He would have texted. He would have done whatever, right? And I think that it's like, to me, watching a movie where cell phones are everywhere and not such a huge part of character interactions is really lame. So how do you make a movie post TikTok, Instagram, YouTube shorts that either doesn't suck or isn't super dishonest about their prevalence? So how do you depict modern culture without people constantly? They could be in the middle of a conversation. How do you show a realistic conversation in a movie now that doesn't have somebody stopping to be like, hang on, let me check this text, which does not make for great filmmaking. So speaking of cell phones, one of the very first scenes in the movie is of the sheriff, and he's watching a YouTube video about how to convince his wife to have a baby. And it immediately speaks to the dangers of like parasociality and parasocial relationships. It's like, this guy is not connecting with anyone in his community. He's not actually talking to his wife directly about this topic. He's like getting advice from watching YouTube videos.
And he's not going to see a therapist about, this problem with his wife, and not even couples therapy. He's like listening to, it's like
one-way communication.
And it's like a how-to video on how to like convince your spouse that you want to have a kid.
How to have that hard talk.
Yeah.
So a protest breaks out in Eddington following the murder of George Floyd. A bunch of high schoolers and activists are clashing with cops in a way that can best be described as very performative activism. And like, I kind of want to ask you what you thought about this, because there's a few things that were happening in this movie, right? People were driving around with masks on in cars by themselves. Right. People were wearing masks on Zoom calls. Ari Aster really goes after Fauci and Gavin Newsom and virtue signalers. Sheriff Cross says at one point, you can always tell when someone learned something new in social studies when he's interacting with all these protesters.
I think he's talking to the kids, and they say something about like settler. I don't think it was settler colonialism, but it was something like that.
Yeah.
And he's like, you can always tell when somebody learns something new in social. And he calls it social studies too, which is like, it's not history, it's social. So it's like, it even feels a little old. Yeah.
So even though I know that that's the authenticity is not the point, that this wouldn't be happening in a small town, blah, blah, blah. But I do think some of these scenes, it's like one of my criticisms of this movie is that it would have probably worked better if it had felt a little less. It was almost over the top. I mean, I remember writing down like, I think Ari Aster's out over his skis at this point in the movie. This is in the middle of like the second act, and I was just kind of like, I'm starting to teeter toward, is this getting a little slapsticky and ridiculous?
Yeah,
and cartoonish.
I almost wonder if it would feel better on a rewatch. Because this is why, and it's not even about Ari Aster, it's about Hollywood. It's like, we all know what Hollywood does to issues. It flattens them, it both sides them. It tried, even with like a lot of controversial stuff of a certain pedigree and probably of a certain budget, it's going to try to find like the soft, squishy center between like mistakes from, where we stop talking about actions and we get very passive, like mistakes were made sort of stuff. Mm-hmm. But that was on first watch, first glance, I was just like, ugh.
It was tough. Yeah.
Nope. Don't love this.
It was tough. I was kind of on my way out. So now I'm going to tell you what brought me back in. Let's talk about, I think probably pound for pound, my favorite moment in the movie.
I think I was the one that clocked it as Katy Perry. I said, oh my God, that's firework. As like, the sheriff is walking up to a campaign party.
Oh, you can hear a muffled version of it.
It's a muffled version. And because Katy Perry's been in the news because she's going through a lot, her ouvre has been in my ears more than it normally would have.
Yeah.
And there's like,
Katy Perry in outer space.
Around the corner to what is a backyard party, but for me was clearly meant to sort of signal there were a bunch of Democrats that had like super spreader parties like Gavin Newsom. Like, I think it was more responsible in the sense that it was like an outdoor campaign party, but we're walking up and I'm like, oh, okay, I know what's happening now. This is Ari Aster's take on Gavin Newsom or on Cuomo.
And the use of that song, which I don't think it quite registered to me this way, but it is kind of the anthem for virtue signalers, I think, is how it's interpreted. It's like
It's like a performative, easy feminism, which is like kind of the whole critique of Katy Perry's career, is that like she wants to make meaningful music but just can't quite pull it off.
Well, and the feminine and the masculine is performed like in a really, really kind of hilarious way. Yeah. So you think I think it's gonna actually turn into real violence. I was expecting like guns to be drawn because of what happens. Right. Pedro Pascal's character, Mayor Ted, slaps Joe Cross, the sheriff, across the face.
There are moments where it verges on slapstick. It's like there's almost a moment where they're like turning up and turning down the music again, like, and then the slap happens. And the way I remember it, Katy Perry disappears, everything disappears. It goes pretty quiet. Whereas like we're inside Joaquin Phoenix's head, Sheriff Joe's head. It's being like, oh my God, my authority, not only has my authority been questioned, I've been like physically struck in a way he was totally not expecting. Like when he originally took the job as sheriff, he expected to never have either to do violence or to have violence done to him.
Yeah. It's an unbelievable moment of humiliation for that character.
It's a moment where Aster is so good in a way that I usually feel deeply uncomfortable with like staying too long on a scene, staying too long on a character's face. You see Sheriff Joe, his glasses, whom amongst us, anybody is like, have gotten knocked slightly askew by the slap. Micro expressions are flashing across his face. There's a little bit of fear. There's a little bit of rage. There's a like, what am I going to do now? It's like among those shots that, across the 3 films of his that I've watched that I remember, this one's communicated as much to me as any of those other shots. And then he turns around and walks away. And this is the piece that felt like deeply human to me. He does not fix his glasses until he's out of the party and nobody's there. Then he straightens his glasses and then he gets in so talk about, he has turned his sheriff's SUV into a moving campaign billboard.
Yeah. Well, I love your observation about the way that Ari Aster has this tendency to linger on things for a really long time. That moment of like deliberation with the camera as it's tracking back with Joaquin Phoenix and Sheriff Joe Cross when he's in that moment of like super profound humiliation.
Yeah.
There's so many things that Aster does where he lingers with his camera for way too long, where you're just kind of like, okay, dude, we get it. We know this is unsettling. I want to pummel you, and then I want to pummel you, and then I want to pummel you. But I kind of feel like it works to perfect effect because it serves as like the bridge in the movie. This becomes a very, very different movie after this. There's his campaign vehicle, and it's got this rack on the top of it. It looks like something out of Mad Max.
It's like
Road Warrior.
It's like if Mad Max happened in Times Square.
Yeah. It's dressed so head to toe with little campaign slogan stuff. So funny.
Photos of him, just like little, weird little signs
and sayings and little slogans that he's attempted that are all ridiculous.
Yeah.
Joe Cross for air, Joe Cross for mayor. And a signature Ari Aster thing is this use of a persistent piece of sound design that's, in this particular instance, it's got this kind of drone of music. And it reminds me of the way he used the sound of a pulse in Hereditary. Yeah. He also did it in The Strange Thing About the Johnsons. This is something he's been doing where it'll intermittently just have something that's persistent in the sound design that accompanies a kind of sentiment of whether it's something like dread or fear.
It's always like a negative sentiment. At least
it's never a good thing.
Yeah,
it's like an increase in anxiety.
It literally almost seems like the personification of anxiety. Yeah.
And there's a follow shot in this moment that reminds me something back to this idea of quote unquote ripping off other filmmakers. It feels like Raising Arizona. This shot of him driving back into town, between the music and that choice of the shot of the vehicle going into town, and like you said, he's adjusting his glasses and stuff. I knew that something, that violence that I was afraid of was coming. This is where it has been built up that he's ingesting massive amounts of social media content. Yeah. He's reading all of the things that he's tagged in and he's reading all his mentions and he's getting super upset.
Yeah.
And that seems like a huge part of this moment.
Yep.
And the fact that he murders the Lodge character, we're going to come back to the significance of that when we wrap up our thoughts on this movie.
Yeah.
And it's like, right, the common sort of platitude of think global, act local becomes think social media, shoot locals. So I go to the bathroom, I come back. I'm like, I know that the movie has turned, but I go to the bathroom and I come back and I see that he's killed his second person, which is the mayor, Ted Garcia.
Yeah.
To me, what I find interesting is Joe Cross and a Pueblo officer comes and arrives to like investigate what's happening, because there's all sorts of issues about physical boundaries.
Right. Good point.
And I thought about how this Joe Cross character seems really, really concerned about what happens in his town of Eddington. He's talking about that constantly, like, you know, don't cross this line, don't come into Eddington, etc. Meanwhile, he's representing the total inability or a lack of awareness of how much people don't have boundaries about what they pour into their brains via unfiltered social media, because he's on his phone constantly at this point in the movie. Let's get to the point, the moment when Joe goes into a kind of chaotic rage. He has COVID at this point.
Or we think he does. That's one of the things that I think is so fascinating. He starts coughing. So we all assume it's COVID.
That's a great point. We assume he has COVID, and it becomes at this point in the movie, it's like fiction versus reality.
Yeah.
I think becomes like totally impossible to distinguish. I'm not even sure that Ari Aster wants to have a conclusion about that.
I think he absolutely does not, actually. Let's unpack this just a little bit. So as the violence starts to escalate, we see, and this is where it starts being a fever dream, and it's like, is this Ari Aster's fever dream? Is this the character's fever dream? Is this supposed to be the audience's fever dream?
Yeah.
There's literally another shot of a private jet flying over. The tail of this plane is a hand clutching the globe. Like, could not be more globalists, whatever. But then there's a tracking shot through the plane where all these clear operators, like these are probably former Navy SEALs, but you get a sense they're on a private jet. So they're not like current army. What they are is probably military contractors. And as you're panning through this plane, you don't actually see their faces. All you see is the gear they've brought. One of like a bunch of backpacks that have like hastily sort of sewn on Antifa logos and stuff like that. So the idea is like, these guys are coming in. We don't know who sent them. We don't know what purpose they're there for, but they're there to look like Antifa.
It's supposed to be this kind of a composite that I think anyone, that they can attach their own meaning to that composite of these fictionalized, hyper individualist, and in many cases manufactured identities.
Yeah.
This is the kind of hyper real element of the movie that Ari Aster's playing with, to where I don't even know if the rest of the events of the movie even happen.
You know, people I know who might identify as Antifa, is like, they definitely are not chartering private planes, right? So my read on that as a certain kind of person is like, oh, that's clearly people sort of masquerading as Antifa for whatever effect. I could also see a conservative person being like, see, that's
the globalists.
That's George Soros, you know, flying Antifa in. I think there's subtext toward the end that makes you sort of point in one direction other than the other, but he leaves that ambiguity in there, and I think it makes the film a lot better.
Yeah, and I think if you did ask Ari Aster, he'd probably say he falls on the side of thinking that plane is operated by Solid Gold Magikarp, but it's not ever said explicitly. It ends with a kind of chase sequence that feels very imagined. I was thinking it's inevitable that you watch this scene and think about Antoine Chigurh from No Country for Old Men in this, but he's unseen. It ends in this kind of metaphor of bullets. There's a kid who comes out with a cell phone that is who ends up shooting the guy who's going to kill Joaquin Phoenix's character, who catches a knife to the top of the head. Okay. And it's a moment that I picked out and didn't like. I found it kind of inauthentic, and you had a great counter to it. But this kid comes out with a cell phone in one hand, a gun in another, and shoots the guy who is attacking Sheriff Joe, and he becomes a hero. And I think it's important to talk about the Brian character. The Brian character early in the movie is a high school kid that's in this town who is trying to find his own fictionalized hyper individualist identity. Yeah. He's like the Will Poulter character in Midsommar. He's like, I want to get laid, so I'm going to pretend to like Bernie. It's that kid who comes out with the cell phone. He then we're jumping ahead, but that character then goes on to become a right-wing influencer as a result
in the postscript,
as a result of being a hero in this moment of saving Sheriff Joe.
So he basically becomes like the Kyle Rittenhouse character of this film. But the thing that I thought was so interesting, the fact that obviously the elevated reality of this is him literally streaming, killing this operator, which when we were having beers afterwards, you were like,
I didn't buy it. I thought it was a little bit cheesy, a little too on the nose. And you reminded me that something happened in Spokane. It's like,
so there's a right-wing streamer from Post Falls, Idaho, either Post Falls or Coeur d'Alene. He's from Kootenai County, who had been coming into Spokane to 2nd and Division, which is where a lot of unhoused people in our city congregate, and just streaming them, making fun of them, taking, just like streaming them as they tried to relieve themselves behind bushes. The video in question that I'm talking about, though, is he's live streaming, and there's 45 minutes of this guy escalating the situation and then saying, get back or I'll shoot, until he's walking backwards up Division Street, which is probably the major north-south arterial in Spokane, blocking traffic with this group of unhoused people, just basically trying to get them to leave them alone until he shoots one of them in the abdomen and almost kills him.
Yeah.
The guy's paralyzed, and the person's in jail. So it's like, this would seem unbelievable, except it literally happened in our city. And in some ways, what really happened is actually like more grotesque and unbelievable than what gets filmed in Eddington.
All right, Luke, the final moment we have to talk about is kind of the aftermath of the movie. It's like, it serves as kind of the epilogue. Yeah. So after this kid, Brian, rescues Sheriff Joe, it flashes forward a year. Joe is paralyzed. He's still mayor in name, but while conspiracy peddling Dawn, who's his mother-in-law, is actually running the town. The teenager that rescued him, Brian, has become a right-wing icon, and the newly completed AI data center is looming in the borders of the town, signaling that, technology and information and misinformation really are the film's ultimate victors.
Before we jump forward, Sheriff Joe has nobody's running against him because he's killed his only other, opponent. Yeah. So he is the mayor, but it's actually his ex-wife's or his estranged wife's mom, who's, I guess, as chief of staff, sort of running the operation. We didn't talk much about her in this recap, and it's not super important to, but she's the one feeding him the conspiracies. She's the one that's like fully Alex Jones vibe. Yeah. The daughter ends up running off with a guy that reminds me a lot of Russell Brand. So like the more touchy-feely, but also more opportunistic kind of conspiracy grifter, whereas the mom has always been like the day one Alex Jones, like true, like Bohemian Grove. I've been on that stuff from day one. Like, she's a hardcore believer. The only thing she doesn't have a conspiratorial idea about is how awesome this data center is going to be for their town. And so she's doing this ribbon cutting. She's the one giving the speech because Joe can't even talk anymore. Joe's sitting in a wheelchair off to her right. The speech she gives from the stage is not in any way, not appreciably different than the speech Pedro Pascal would have given from that same stage if he were still alive and if he would have been mayor. So the only thing this character does not question and does not turn into a conspiracy is how good this data center is going to be for their town.
So there's a transformation of virtually every character in this movie at this point. And it's all like the data center is kind of like rocket fuel for the opportunity to seize power, seize influence, and to seize ultimately money. Yeah. Everyone changes their tune when it comes to their ability to leverage influence or power or money or whatever because of the data center and the money behind the data center. Solid Gold Magikarp. Mayor Cross is now this kind of vegetated cipher for that character. Dawn, the mother-in-law, she becomes kind of like a Marjorie Taylor Greene kind of a figure.
No, there's even a picture of her taking a selfie with Marjorie Taylor Greene. It flashes on screen just for a second. Somebody. Maybe it was the kid.
But it is the kid.
Maybe it's the kid.
It is the kid.
It's the kid.
But she becomes like a composite of the demagogues we see all the time on social media. Her politics are fluid.
It's also just this really pointed observation that is, I think, also borne out by, psychological study. It's like, the less power you have, the more susceptible you are to conspiracies, right? Because conspiracies are a way of sort of explaining the world where you have no power in a way that makes you feel like you've got power, or at least you have the knowledge of what's going on behind the scenes. We don't get enough of the mother-in-law character to know if she's still peddling conspiracies or not, like 24/7. But now that she's got the power, she doesn't need the conspiracy as much to explain her worldview.
Do we get a chance to talk about the funniest moment in the movie, which might actually not be the slap and the slap fight and all that stuff? I mean, I had a note of the ultimate cuck.
I think I just texted it to you, turbo cuck.
Turbo cuck.
So at the end of this press conference where they cut the ribbon on the thing, and we fully realize just that, not only is he paralyzed, but he's completely vegetative. He can still see and hear. It's kind of like the Metallica song,
It's a diving bell and the butterfly kind of a character. Yeah.
And it
cuts to a scene where he's at his home and he's being carried naked. Like, I think he's or his pants, he's without pants.
Something like that, yeah.
And he's being dragged onto the toilet by a male nurse character who slaps him as he's getting ready to put him onto the toilet.
It's like he was, basically trying to get him to calm down. He might have been twitching or something. So the guy slapped him and then immediately apologized.
That's right. He then apologizes very quickly.
I'm sorry.
But it's like the second time that the Joe Cross character has been slapped. Yeah. And it's really playing with the feminine and the masculine in this moment of like the nurse character is played by a man, which is played a little bit for laughs. But then the ultimate laugh comes when then he's in bed. And
so he's been put to bed, and we don't know what the situation with the mom is, much less the nurse and the wife. We know the wife isn't back in the picture.
No, because she's joined a cult. And
So Joe is lying in bed and can't move. He's been placed there by the nurse, and then the mother-in-law comes in and lays down next to him, like in a moment of, it's like, oh, is this domestic bliss? Are they now in a sort of a non-sexual relationship?
Yeah, for just a faint moment, you can be like, oh, this is actually like, she's taking care of him.
Yeah, and so maybe it makes sense that she's sleeping next to him in case he needs something, whatever. But then
by degrees, each time you're like, no, Aster's up to something entirely different. The nurse then crawls into bed next to her, and then you're still just going, weird. But maybe it's because he's got to take care of Joaquin Phoenix and Joe Cross, right? But then
it's like a Charlie and the Chocolate Factory thing where all the the grandparents and the kids are all sleeping in the same bed. Yeah. It's not.
No, because then Dawn, the mother-in-law character, starts to make out with the nurse, and you're like, oh my god, what are they called?
Buckets. Yeah,
the Bucket family.
Yeah. So this is going to be like a Bucket family moment,
a sick, twisted, perverse Bucket family.
So that's the action, the rising action, the falling action, the disturbing action. Let's talk about the thing that I think is the ultimate bad guy. And Ari Aster keeps saying, this is the point of the film. It's the point of the film. It's the point of the film.
Yep.
But the point of the film never really gets said on camera. It's all stuff we have to fight with. It's solid gold Magikarp, the thing that is at the center of all of this violence, but is never blamed or is sort of secondary to it the entire time.
And it's the type of thing that rewards, as a moviegoer, active participation, where you have a note in your head. You're like, the data center. I thought this movie was really good and I enjoyed it, but I wasn't quite sure. I didn't think I was against any of its arguments, but I was also kind of like not entirely secure in my understanding of what it was up to until I Googled solid gold Magikarp and found the following. So you said the thing about Pokemon, which is where it has its roots, right?
Probably what like the code bro or the prompt engineer was like thinking about when he named, like when they discovered this thing and then named it. It's like a callback to a classic video game character.
Yeah, from Pokemon. And when I walked in here and asked our friend Nick before we started recording, I was like, solid gold Magikarp. He was like, yeah, it's worth thousands of dollars.
So he was talking about the card game version of this, the Pokemon card game. Yeah.
But here's the thing. I Googled that word.
Yeah.
And one of the first articles that comes up is from a website called Deconstructing AI, large language model. Here's how they work. They store information. They call that information tokens. When there's a glitch in how those tokens interact with one another, AI experts have a term for this. They call them anomalous tokens, right? Me wearing a Portland Trailblazers hat and a Spokane shirt
would be
I might be a walking, talking anomalous token myself.
And when we hear like lay people hear about AI hallucinating, it's probably one or more anomalous tokens sort of taking the program sort of off base in a way that you don't expect.
Yeah, exactly. So one of the most popular examples of an anomalous token is the terms solid gold Magikarp. Ostensibly, once upon a time, people typed that into ChatGPT, and it basically created a kind of Total Recall 2 weeks response from ChatGPT. It didn't know what to do.
It sort of broke the model.
Could not compute. So there's a bunch of different LLMs out there. Some of them are kind of like discipline specific. There might be one that's about a certain subject matter.
Right.
Like one about, the example from this article I read from a critic from Film Colossus. His name is Chris Lambert. The example he gave was of like a medical LLM, medical journal LLM.
Right.
If you type in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle, it might know what to do with teenage, but it's not going to know what to do with the rest of that. And it might spit out a gibberish response, AKA hallucination, what's called hallucination.
Right.
This is from Deconstructing AI. While most tokens function predictably within the system, some behave in ways that defy expectation. These are called anomalous tokens, such as the quirky solid gold Magikarp. And this is what Ari Aster has talked about a lot, is we don't start with the same agreed upon facts when we have arguments. We have arguments about things. We don't even agree what we're arguing about.
Right.
So Lodge to me is not an unhoused homeless dude who's like, or has COVID or whatever.
He's an anomalous token.
To me, he, by the end, it's clear that he is spouting gibberish because he represents where this is all headed.
Yeah.
He is what results from people being served up data. I'm putting data in air quotes here. He's blurting out solid gold Magikarp over and over and over again. He is basically a walking, talking utterer of anomalous tokens.
We're living in a world where people don't agree on what is real anymore. And that's leading to paranoia and distrust and suspicion. And I think COVID was maybe the point at which our link to an old system was finally cut completely, went away completely. I think it's where we all kind of became untethered from any shared sense of what is real. And I think a part of it is this age of hyper-individualism, where your personal identity is everything, and there's no collective sense of much.
We're already seeing this play out every day in pop culture. The Sydney Sweeney controversy, shout out Sydney Sweeney, who's from Spokane in Northern Idaho. That controversy to me is basically like a perfectly executed example of a cultural solid gold Magikarp moment. Yeah. It takes real and fake progressives getting mad. It takes real and fake anti-woke MAGA people responding to that anger. It's all then bundled up for 24 hours before the next solid gold Magikarp comes along to replace it, rinse, repeat.
People are like getting angry about or at American Eagle and the people that made the ad, and it's Sydney Sweeney. It's really dark, not because Sydney Sweeney or even American Eagle did anything right or wrong. It's like the amount of time we're spending on talking about this, which is why ultimately why I think the operators that were flown in on the planes had to be part of the solid gold Magikarp, because I think the whole point there is like they actually don't even care who they're killing. Like it's not even clear who the target for these operators is. Is it the sheriff? Is it not? What it really feels like is this is a corporation that was, just by dint of how many jobs this data center is going to create, expects the sort of calm that capital wants to just continue printing money, right? So when there's unrest in this town, they're like, I don't care who needs to die or like who needs to go away, who needs to be silenced. We just need to silence people so that this thing can calm down so we can turn our data center on and start printing money.
Well, and these data centers are creating the ultimate mechanism of divide and conquer.
It's almost like the violence, the destruction of our social fabric was its own anomalous token from the very sort of straightforward and in a lot of ways banal act of capitalism itself. In a platform monopoly sort of situation, the whole point is like, I want you on Facebook, or I want you on Instagram, or I want you on YouTube as much as humanly possible, because that's when the dollars get made. And the way that those then algorithms are created to either show you more of what you love as much as anything in the world, or the things you hate as much as anything in the world, creates this polarization that's just been, turned up to 11.
And Aster's feelings about these 24-hour news cycles of anomalous tokens arguments with human beings that we're describing here.
Yeah.
It comes out even when he doesn't say it expressly. So this is something he wrote thinking back on his experiences in June of 2020.
Yeah.
I wrote this film in a state of anxiety and worry and fear. I feel like that's a place that most of us are living in now. I feel totally powerless and everything feels impossibly corrupt and just compromised. It feels like we're living out this experiment that has obviously failed and nobody at the levers has any interest in slowing it down. In fact, it keeps accelerating. I do wonder, what would an olive branch look like? Can there be some solidarity in just pulling back collectively and seeing the insanity of this moment? I don't know. We're all kind of unreachable to each other. I don't know what the solution is, but I do know that we need to re-engage with each other somehow. I have a lot of hope, but I have very little confidence. That was his response to being asked if he has any hope when talking to Sean Fennessy on The Big Picture.
I have a lot of hope. I have very little confidence.
He doesn't say data center. He doesn't say solid gold Magikarp, but that's obviously what he's referring to.
The solid gold Magikarp is this anomaly. It's also a goofy Pokemon character, which like so many tech companies and let's just say that like tech companies are the Ford of our era, right? It's like Ford, Chevy, GMC, the things that built America in the automobile age have been replaced with Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, whatever. Like the fact, not just that like the data center is for AI, but that they named the company after the anomalous token feels like the step into the void that I don't know how we're going to get back from, right? So think about this, like the actual company, they found the anomaly and they're like, not only are we're not scared of this anomaly, we're not terrified by it. We see its growth potential and how it can change and we have no control over it. So it's almost like, you know, Henry Ford was just a fire breathing racist and like one of the worst people in the world, but he was making cars for people, right?
Yeah.
Like that's his whole plan was like, let's make this assembly line as efficient as possible. Let's churn out as many of these Model Ts and on down the line as possible. The fact that this is called Solid Gold Magikarp, and then that's what like we're dumping all of our capital into is this thing where we can't even see the bottom of the well. We don't know what's at the bottom of it. We don't know what's coming next. The fever dream in some ways, although this is like a less outwardly stressful, terrifying, neurotic movie, the repercussions of that world that we've just got done is actually making me more paranoid after the fact than I think I've ever been at any Ari Aster movie while I was watching it.
When we were talking earlier, Luke, and you first brought up this idea of them leaning into the anomalous token aspect of these data centers and AI, I shot back. It's like they're leaning into it being a feature, not a bug, that these interactions that we're seeing with human beings as a result of misinformation or conspiracy theories or just whatever hyper individualized experiences that are being served up to people. That is actually the ultimate. It is the feature. It's not a bug. They are going to lean into that because the result is divide and conquer. I agree with you that this is a battering experience. The more I spend time thinking about it, it's hard not to be despairing when you think about Eddington, and it's hard not to think of it as like the most important movie of the last 25 years, maybe. I can now see that argument. At first, when I saw like some of the people out there saying this movie's being misunderstood or it's not being appreciated correctly, it doesn't even matter what you think of it from an enjoyment or pleasure perspective.
I haven't seen a ton of like meditating on COVID movies just because I don't know what's the point. But I did watch Mountainhead. I'm a huge Jesse Armstrong fan. Succession might be certainly in my top 5 favorite TV shows of all time. His movie kind of about the pandemic and about tech bros and how they're destroying everything. Mountainhead.
Mountain God Accelerator Legacy Manifestation! Slow down entity to ensure biotech delivers meaningful life extension, unfettered by the dead hand of government overregulation.
Funny. It's like, it's fine. 4 billionaires are trapped in a mountain cabin as the world is falling apart. The whole point of that movie is that we've let the dumbest people in the world control the world, right? Yeah. In hindsight, and actually having watched Eddington, I think part of why this hit a lot harder as a moral for our times, a moral for the pandemic, a moral for our technological present, and hopefully not our technological future, but increasingly likely our technological future, is that those people aren't actually in control either. They think they might be, which is why like they send in the operators, to go just kill whoever. Again, not to mete out justice, but to restore order. Yep. And we're all along for the ride. And that's really terrifying to me.
And the goal of all that activity and energy is to make sure that the data center goes on as planned.
Yeah.
I think that Sam Esmail's movie, Leave the World Behind, another dystopian movie, that's also super bleak. That one hit hard too in a different kind of way.
Make the target as deaf, dumb, and paralyzed as possible, setting them up for the second stage. Synchronized chaos.
So the night I watched Eddington, I take my daughter, my 14-year-old, to Panda Express like 15 minutes before they close. And I'm standing in line and I'm looking at her and all these other teenagers that are headed down there with like 15 minutes left before they close. And I'm, I couldn't help but think it was really, really tough after watching Eddington to be like, we have given this generation literally nothing. And now I think we're accelerating toward giving them something much worse than nothing, which is Solid Gold Magikarp. Yeah. I still remember I have vivid memories of watching George Floyd slowly killed on a cell phone video in the midst of the pandemic when we were all isolated and stuck at home feeling powerless. And I was just thinking to myself, is this a ritual, to use that word again? Is that worth preserving? I mean, I think the movie kind of peels back the curtain on what is ultimately starting to feel increasing like a giant Milgram experiment. Like what we see now is a total lack of compassion. Images out of Gaza, just keep swiping. Okay. Our inability to care about Gaza, I don't think is surprising, because it's a few years after we showed a total inability to care about 7 million people dying directly from COVID, another 30 million dying from associated diseases and other factors. Like, this is what has happened. My first experience of profound anxiety in my life was a year coming out of the pandemic, when everybody was like trying to return to, seeing one another. And I think much of that anxiety and that rush that I feel was from the startle of some of these images that I was seeing on social media. But I don't feel that way anymore when I see startling images on social media.
I think for me, what it feels like is we had this visceral moment, and we really wanted or a lot of people really wanted the world to change, and it didn't. And then it's easy. It's not to me that the images are any less visceral, or at least, for me personally, it's just like, what can I do about Gaza? I couldn't stop the next George Floyd, and I'm on the same continent. What could I possibly do about, and especially working as a local journalist in Spokane, I think a lot about, like, what can I do to help that? Should I just ignore it, or do I just look past it? We've been given this panopticon of the entire world, and we have very little power to affect any of it. And I think that's a deeply alienating experience, even aside from all the algorithmic stuff. It's just the fact that I can see what's happening on the other side of the world at any moment, if I am trying, can look in the right place, was the thing, honestly, because as a kid who stayed up late when the World Wide Web went live, I think when I was like in 8th grade, like I've been a tech optimist for the first half of my life. And I'm like increasingly whatever is more pessimistic than a tech pessimist. Like, I'm a tech fatalist. Like, I think this is going to destroy us. But it's fundamentally the same piece. That's like, I have access to everything and I can affect nothing.
When Ray asks me often, like, what can we do about what's happening in Gaza? Just as use that example again, I never have the ability to say anything other, because it's like, oh, how do you stop the power of these lobbies? How do you stop Citizens United? So what I can only say, and I'll use another one of these quotes from the people that came to that watched that screening with us, right? The only thing I can think to do is to go hang out with people in real life, go to movie theaters and have conversations about the movies that you watch. And so let's listen to our friends Tracy and Lenore one more time.
You're just gloss over it. Oh, that was weird. We were at home working from home for like a year and all that. But yeah, Black Lives Matter happened then too. And all of that is just a blur right now. But this brings it all back. We like to go see Joaquin Phoenix movies because they're always a little bit crazy.
My biggest concern is people revolve their thought process on a false little thing. I don't have one for that reason, because it is engendering the fear and anger that is at the heart of disconnect. And us, them, we, they. I think we've given over our ability to think and to process and even to feel because of this device. I think it's the Antichrist. And I'm not religious, but that's the word I would use.
I think Ari Aster, and this actually ties in beautifully to what Lenore said, Ari Aster is still meditating on fetish and worship. The thing that's fascinating, though, is Hereditary is a movie about an actual cult worshiping what seems to be an actual god who can move in the world, like probably orchestrates the death of the kid and then, takes the kid over. So there's an actual non-human, outside of human existence, an evil, a god, a demon, whatever.
Shout out Paimon.
Midsommar is an actual cult, but sort of an actual cult worshiping a pagan religion. It's not clear at all that there's any sort of external supernatural influence happening on that cult. But it is American kids fetishizing different parts of like an idealized American experience, the trip abroad, the summer abroad. One guy just wants to, get laid. The other guys are looking to, again, in a very sort of male gazy way, like, I'm going to take this culture and make it my thesis.
Very
right?
land without bread, travelogue.
I'm going to colonize this culture for my thesis, whatever. Eddington is all of us worshiping a panoply of a million different fetish objects, whatever we gravitate toward, and we're being harvested from too, but more like cattle and not shafts of wheat. Like we don't have to die to be harvested from. We're just being milked for our data. And that means then maybe that the real bad guys are the ones preying on our real worst impulses, not to win elections again, and not to gain that kind of political power, just to maintain control and then to accrete as much capital and the sort of more totalizing form of power, which is impunity.
I never knew quite how to articulate, and I think Eddington's going to help me articulate my argument against and even using and uttering the phrase both sides.
Yeah.
Stop. It's fucking horseshit. There is no such thing.
Yeah.
It's a fiction that we're all sort of stuck in this stupid spiral using digital experiences and the hyper individualized digital experiences to explore the space of the idea of having an identity that's either a red or a blue or a us versus them and all this kind of stuff. So I think we've come to the same conclusion about what Aster's up to in these movies.
For example, I don't think I agree, or I definitely don't agree with Lenore and her opinion about masks.
Yeah.
I definitely agree with Lenore and her opinion about phones.
It's such a good point. But if you were to interact with Lenore on social media, how would that go? Right?
I don't think it'd go well.
Would you even be served up her take on the cell phones? Or would you just be served up her take on masks?
Maybe.
See?
Yeah, good point.
So I think his films want to show us what happens when people and their attentions are appropriated by these disruptive, disturbing phenomena, lots of them malevolent, obviously, and what that does to relationships. I think that the response to the death of Danny's family in Midsommar and her pending breakup, the response to the tragic death of the Charlie character and Hereditary, and the response of this entire town. So he goes couple, family, or I guess it's family, then couple. And then it's, I have not seen Beau is Afraid. Sorry, Ari Aster, who's never going to listen to this. And then it's a response of the entire town of Eddington to what you think is COVID, but no. It's actually this glowing building off in the in the border of the town.
Yep.
Solid gold Magikarp. Luke, earlier you were saying something about the flattening of characters and how that, that it ends up being a little bit politically, I think, facile when you do that.
Yep.
And I think treating every identity group in the fictional world of Eddington, it could become facile and seem inauthentic, but I don't think that happens because it's super, super funny. Basically, the premise of Eddington it's like the premise of Idiocracy with the setting and the structure and the landscape of No Country for Old Men, especially when you think of Solid Gold Magikarp. So you've got and I think I would call this movie No Country for Thoughtful, Kind, or Indigenous Men. And I love the way this is another, I think it's like a Kubrick intervention in the movie. The Pueblo officer, Butterfly Jimenez. Yeah. He's honest. He's diligent. He's trying to solve the murder of Garcia.
He's going to solve the murder.
He is going to.
He has a beat on Joe. We didn't talk about this. He knows Joe is probably the guy that killed the mayor.
But obviously, Aster's fairly cynical about that. So he becomes kind of like the Dick Halloran character in Stanley Kubrick's version of The Shining, not to be confused with Stephen King's book.
Remind us who Dick Halloran is real quick.
Dick Halloran's played by Scatman Crothers. He's the character who can shine. He's the character who can see kind of telepathically. He has a link to the character of Danny.
So he's like the supernatural mentor to the child in the movie. Who's the kind of the main character who has this power.
Exactly.
You think he's going to be a mentor. And
you think he's going to be a hero because just when you think this guy's going to save the day, Jack Torrance puts an axe into his chest. And similarly, Joe Cross, who's on his shooting spree, Call of Duty style in downtown Eddington, he wings, and I think
no, he does not wing. He wings him, but it's with like a 50 caliber machine gun. So he wings him and blows his leg off. Dude.
Yeah, he doesn't die though, right?
Well, he then dies later with I think from the operators or something, but it's like that is a mortal wound.
Yeah,
but it was completely unintentional.
Either way, kind of like the Tommy Lee Jones character in No Country for Old Men, where he's just kind of like he becomes this ineffectual dude who's sat at his dining room table at the end. Very shot for shot similar thing. The morning after the beginning with Joaquin Phoenix and his mother-in-law and his wife sitting at the table. I was like, God, this looks straight out of the end of No Country for Old Men. comment, and I think that's intentional. Michael, the black police officer that Cross is promoted earlier in the movie, he's been maimed but somehow survived, and it's obvious that he's not that his good actions have not been rewarded in this movie. And I think I loved what Aster said about all this. He said on the Big Picture podcast, he said, I wanted to pull back as far as I could to include as many instruments in the cacophony as possible without sacrificing coherence and without neglecting to tell a story. Bravo, Ari Aster.
I think that's one of the reasons that I ended up not minding the flattening of the characters, because it's almost like in the movie, we're getting their social media personas more than we're getting their full selves as viewers of the movie. Because assuming this is a real place, all these characters would have a million different moments of interaction and backstory. All we're really getting is their social media persona. And that's kind of what makes it work as well as it did, and how I was kind of converted from being like, oh God, this is going to be, the flattening's intentional and it's purposeful and it's used to really, really good intent. And honestly, when we're talking about characters, I don't know, man, it just kind of, the more I think about it, and another reason I want to go watch it again is like, have I just built this up into the perfect movie in my head? Yeah. I need to kind of go watch it again to make sure it's as good as I think it is.
Well, as the ultimate post-structuralist cinephile dork of this podcast, I don't care whether or not Ari Aster meant any of this stuff, but it's pretty clearly that he did mean a lot of the stuff that we're talking about, because he had this to say. We're going to do a couple comps here. He said, I obviously love talking about other filmmakers, he said with a laugh after rattling off a list of the movies that he admires. I really consider myself a cinephile as much as I would consider myself a filmmaker. I'm making movies almost so that they can have dialogue with other movies. That's a quote from this story from, God, it was years ago, from The Gate, Canadian magazine. And it was in that article that he mentioned he had the cast of Hereditary watch 45 years from Andrew Haigh, Todd Field in the bedroom, and Mike Lee's All or Nothing. Luke, guess who was the production designer on All or Nothing?
Eve Stewart. Go listen to our first episode of All Those Moments. He's obviously influenced by Paddy Chayefsky, the screenwriter and playwright who wrote Network. I thought of Peckinpah's Straw Dogs, a movie he has mentioned being influential, and it feels connected to all his movies, frankly. John Sayles' Lone Star, which I just got the Criterion 4K Blu-ray on the way to me, so I'm excited to see that. I think that's got its fingerprints all over this. I thought of the Alexander Payne's movie Election. I almost said, when you were talking about Mad Max and that campaign vehicle, I almost said it's like Mad Max in Election in Times Square. Because like the car literally looks like Times Square.
And the fight that Reese Witherspoon and Matthew Broderick have in that movie, it plays out very similarly, with lots of the humiliation suffered by the Matthew Broderick character in particular. Obviously, the Coens with Big Lebowski, No Country, he cited specifically Lars von Trier's Dogville and Oliver Stone's JFK. Luke, if we quickly wanted to rank the movies of Ari Aster, how would you do so? You go first. What would be your favorite? I have not seen Beau is Afraid, so that's not going to be on the list, unfortunately.
Can I, rather than saying my favorites, can I say the order I think people should watch them in?
Sure.
I think I would go Hereditary. Eddington, Midsommar, which is the order I watched them in, and then Beau is Afraid last, if you make that journey and you come out alive and not so changed that you're not the same person anymore. What about you?
The order is funny. I think if you want to see them and have a deep appreciation for Ari Aster as a filmmaker, and see like how, I think he was very antagonistic as a filmmaker at AFI, which he also had a quote talking about how it was a great place to just make mistakes, something I've constantly said to people. I love film school because it was safe to be bad at it. You know, no one cares. So just go for it.
That's what college is. Yeah.
So I might even start with his thesis film. It's brutal. It's a 30.
Wait, did you watch it?
Yeah, I did. It's on YouTube. But
sounds awful.
I think I would watch them in order. That's actually what I would say. But yeah, Eddington for me would be my favorite of his movies at this point. It has the most important things to say about the most important thing happening in our world with the highest stakes imaginable, AI and tech companies. What would you say about, I'm going to make you do the order of you're going to list by your favorites, because we're going to make this a segment.
I think in terms of like, I tend to think about films lasting longer in my mind when they mean something to me. And by that, I mean when they say something about the world that I can understand. So yeah, I mean, in that sense, I think Eddington is absolutely my favorite movie of his.
Okay, so we both have that number one.
Yeah, I think then probably Hereditary, and then Midsommar third. But Hereditary just because it felt like a really awesome offbeat horror movie.
No, it's awesome.
And then Midsommar is kind of grown on me the way Eddington did. But I don't know that I want to rewatch Midsommar as much as I want to rewatch Eddington, if that makes sense.
It does. I would give Hereditary number 2 as well because of the craft.
Yeah.
It's just so brilliantly constructed on every technical level, sound design among them for sure. But I would have to put Midsommar last, even though I think it might be just as smart as Eddington. Because the truth is, I know people love Florence Pugh. She's fine. She's great. She's incredible in that movie. But I can't recommend a movie that shows a middle-aged woman pushing the ass cheeks of a dude into a woman he's having sex with, drugged and against his will, Luke. That moment lives in my head, and it's not rent-free. The rent is pretty fucking expensive. That is a very, very difficult movie to watch. I felt sick at the end. I was like,
I mean, it's nauseating, yeah.
I was like, I shouldn't be watching this. This should not be, it shouldn't, I'm not gonna say it should be illegal, but like, this is like watching Faces of Death. I literally, and I'm looking over at my 14-year-old who was like, Dad, I watched this on a small TV because she had seen both of his movies. And she was like, I watched this, and she'd seen it when she was 12, dude. She's like, I watched it on a small TV with the volume kind of low with my friend. I did not know that this movie was like this. Watching it on our big 65-inch screen with Dolby Atmos.
With your bowel rumbling bass.
Oh my God. So yeah. All right, Luke, we've done it.
Then we just have to disqualify. Both of us have to disqualify Beau is Afraid because you didn't even try. And I tapped out.
And everyone I've talked to is like, I made it 10 minutes. So sorry, Ari Aster. I
do want to try to get through it, but I don't know when. It'll be at a point where I either I'm feeling really, really good about myself or really, really bad about myself.
I watched The Strange Thing About the Johnsons without flinching. I'm sure I can handle watching Beau is Afraid. Yeah. Let's wrap this up. That's going to do it. This is our Ari Aster deep dive. It's going to do it for this episode of All Those Moments. Be sure to follow us on YouTube, on Instagram. We have lots of video clips, so I would recommend YouTube so you don't have to deal with that vertical video crap. I can't believe I'm like shouting out Solid Gold Magikarp to end this podcast. We also have a Patreon. It's obviously early days, but please give us a follow on there too. Thank you, Luke.
Thanks, Benji. Bye. Oh wait, am I supposed to do something?
No.
Oh, okay.